we need to talk about your Mac's personal hygiene. You've built your synthesizer. You've got oscillators, you've got MIDI control, LFOs, controlling the kind of fluctuation and oscillation of various parameters. You've got an envelope generator to build notes and shape notes. You've got some basic delay effects. But really what you've got is a mess at this point. We need to kind of talk about this and ways to fix it, because if you've ended up with anything close to what I have here, this is not great. This is not an efficient patch, and it's going to be very easy to get lost in this and just generally not really understand the instrument that you've built and what it can do. So luckily, Max has a really helpful feature that allows us to only focus on the bits that we need to use. So let's say we've built our instrument, it looks something like this, and now we want to perform it, we want to play it like an instrument. Now, I would say 80% of this patch we don't need to be able to see in order to play. So why are we looking at it? Well, Max gives us what it calls presentation mode or presentation view, and that allows us to hide everything that we don't need, or actually more specifically, it allows us to see only the stuff that we want to see. So we can build a kind of second interface, or a second kind of skin for our instrument, showing only the really, really important bits. Okay, and that's what we're going to do now. So I've got a whole mess of a system going on here, and we need to kind of make something of this. Now, hopefully, as you've been going along and sort of developing your instrument, you have been keeping comments. Okay, that's a super important thing, and it's often overlooked, especially by people that are new to Max. They kind of go through a session and think, all right, I can string this together and string this together. But keep comments to yourself, because if you don't, you're going to come back to this in a week or two and nothing is going to make sense anymore. So the shortcut for creating comments is just C, or you can use the comment key up in the top left hand corner. But this is just really important for keeping notes. So this is so just to remind me what this is doing, why I'm doing it, and why it needs to be there. Okay, now I can look at this in a couple of weeks when I come back to this and know exactly what this thing is. So I'm going to just turn on our instrument now. And you see already, there are some things that are very cluttered, and some things that it's really difficult to follow. Like, for instance, what is all of these meters showing me? I'm not actually sure. And while it's interesting for us to know about the MIDI value and the frequency that we're getting in hertz, we don't really need to know it as performers of this instrument, okay? So, what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to start by making this patch neater. Before we dive into presentation mode, we're just going to clean some things up. I'm actually going to just stop the audio for a second, because what I'm about to do can sometimes crash Max, so be warned. Make sure you've saved before you do everything here. Okay, so I'm just going to select everything. I'm going to use Command A to do this, and everything has been highlighted. Now, specifically what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to sort out all of this spaghetti mess. And to do that, I can either use the shortcut Command Shift Y, or I can go to Arrange and Root Patch Chords. Just a testament to how messy this was. That took a few seconds to do. So there we go. That's already a lot easier to follow. Okay, I've lost the kind of weird spaghetti trail, and now it's a bit easier to follow things. But there's still a lot of unnecessary information here which we could hide. Okay, so the first thing is, this is all stuff that relates to our main oscillator voice, right? We don't need to know the MIDI note value. we don't need to see the MIDI to frequency converter or the FM oscillator or the complex oscillator down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag and select everything related to this thing that I want to hide. And I'm just going to drop it into a subpatch. So I'm going to do Command, Shift, and E. And there. Everything has disappeared into this subpatch, which I'm just going to give the name, this is my FM oscillator. And if I want to just check everything is still there, I just double click on it, and sure enough, everything has been carefully hidden away in this subpatch. So straight away, that's kind of nice. And I'll grab this little comment label just so I know exactly what is going on there. So at a glance now I can see, okay, this is where my FM oscillator is. Now I'm going to do the same thing for some other elements of this patch. Okay, so I'm just going to go through, I'm going to grab the parts that I don't need to directly interact with. I do want to use that and this, so this is all going to be relating to my filter. So my filter is there. There's an LFO control, but I don't need to see that anymore because that's hidden away. I wasn't controlling the LFO, but if I was, I'd want to keep it out of the subpatch. And similarly, I'll now go ahead and I'll just do the same for the other side of the synthesizer. Okay, so I've hidden both of the kind of voices, oscillators and filters, but it's still a bit of a mess. I just wanted to show something quickly. You see how kind of everything starts to move out of line with each other, and it gets a little tricky when you start to do it. So we've got these unrooted patch chords back, so I'd need to go back through everything and kind of line them all back up if I wanted to. One thing that is really useful when you're trying to clean up your patch is down here in the bottom left, show grid. So we get this grid on the background, and then we can go to arrange and snap to grid, and that's just going to help us drag things so that they line up according to the grid, and it makes it just a little bit easier as we go around cleaning things up. So you'll see that now things are kind of, it's easy to pick certain things out if I start to line them up accordingly. I can just grab things, move them around, and sort of get them a little bit neater and a little bit more sensibly placed. So again, if I hold Alt or Option on a Mac and drag, that will select everything including the chords. So if I just do a drag and shift, it won't select the chords. I hold Option and it will, and then Command, Shift and Y, and that will clean things up. But down here you see that things are still a bit messy. So usually the first thing that I do when I'm trying to clear these sections up is I zoom in on them and I start to kind of pull things apart. By teasing it apart, it's a bit easier to kind of separate things and figure out how they relate to one another. So I can see that this envelope generator should feed into the amplifier, so it makes sense if they go together. I can kind of place them and position them in a sensible layout and then line things up. So again, this appears to be related to my delay, so I'm going to move that out here. This looks like it's all one stereo panning device, so I'm going to move that up just so it's kind of on its own a bit. I think this must be the right channel version and the left channel version, so this. In the process of clearing some space here, I've got my two delays and my two panners. I've discovered something interesting. I don't actually have a master volume control, a volume control on the final output. So you'll see here that I've got all of my various sort of output sections. Sometimes you'll find that you just out of habit connect them directly to the main output. But what I've done is I've put a left channel and a right channel final kind of attenuator option. So what we could do, we could control this audio by just sending kind of a float value to both of these, you know, a number between 0 and 1, so that we could control the volume. So if I just turn my audio on, I could control the master volume by just fading this down. But we might want something a little bit more visual for our final control. So one way of doing this would be just with a slider. Now a slider is going to give us some numbers out. Let me just disconnect this quickly just to show you. So a slider is going to give us numbers between 1 and 127, which we certainly don't want to be sending to our final amplifier. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to send it to an object to divide by 127 and full stop. And that should give us volume control that goes from 0 to 1. So that could be my gain slider, which is quite nice, particularly with the meters, the meter objects. So that's meter tilde. So I could kind of move these things down here. Have that audio control section. Because I know now that it's doing them both at the same time, it's stereo. So I could just set this. There we go, I think that'll do. So now I've got a master control, so I can just very quickly change the volume if I need to, which is quite nice. And again, just with this isn't necessary, nor is this. So I'll just sub-patch those. I'll call it master out. And Alt and select. Let me just turn this off. And just clean everything up a bit. So now I know that I've got a master audio output control, and I can just quickly control that with this. So what else can I do to make this a bit more usable and a bit more user-friendly? Well, now I'm going to look at the control interface, the way that we're going to interact with this, and to do that I'm going to use Max's presentation mode. So when you're in an unlocked patcher, you can right-click on any of these objects, and you see here I've got add to presentation. Okay, so if I do that, if I take away, can you see now that that K slider has a sort of red glow around the outside of it? Well, that means that that object is now in a presentation mode. So down here in the bottom left, I've got this presentation mode view. If I switch over to that now, everything has disappeared apart from that K slider. And I can move this around, and I can change the size of it. And when I go back to our main edit window, it'll go back to original. So this is a really nice way of just adding the few items that we need, that we want to be able to see and we want to be able to interact with. We can add it to a kind of different view, the sort of front face panel of the instrument, so to speak. So what I'll do now is I would go through and just grab by holding shift and clicking on all of the things that I want to control or I want to see. Okay, so that includes things like the text to explain what it is and what it's doing, why it goes there, system power. I want to see these pan controls. Even though I'm not controlling them, I'd like to be able to see where they are. I don't really need these, so I could just delete them. I want this control and I want this control, so I know it's delay. And I would like my final audio output, all of those, and let's have the sonogram. So I'm going to right click now, add to presentation, and now all of these, fingers crossed, should come across into the presentation mode. Yep. Now they're all in slightly strange positions given that now, you know, everything's been sort of moved around, but it's very easy to kind of quickly figure out what they are and where they are. One nice little trick is that Max allows us, if we go to view, we can create a new view. Okay, So this is giving us a second screen, you see? It's the same patch. So let's just shrink this down. So I can have this main view in the normal edit window. And I can have this view in presentation mode. And it's very easy then to see what I'm clicking on. So if I click on here, you should see that it lights up in the other window so that I can tell which one. Like if I was wondering which key slider I'm clicking on, I know that it's that one and not that one, which is really good for figuring out kind of which item you're selecting. So for now, I just need this main window. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move some things around and try and get this in a configuration that makes sense to me as a performer. Things that I want to know and be able to see and interact with as I use this instrument. So I've gone through and I've moved some things around and I've kind of put things in a position that I think might be useful to me. Now I should say, your synthesizer should probably work very differently to mine. Mine is just doing these kind of automatic things because I'm not playing this while I'm talking about it, so I'm just setting it to do things. You will probably have much more control over your instrument than I have over this. This is kind of just something that I've set to automate and just run itself. So I don't necessarily need control of my filter, but this is just showing me what's going on. Similarly, with the panning, you would want to be able to control yours, whereas mine is just kind of doing whatever. Now, in the process of kind of clearing things up, it's really important to think about what you need and think about what you don't need. So I realized very quickly that actually it doesn't really make sense for me to have anything showing the oscillator because the oscillator's not doing anything. I'm controlling elements of the oscillator and it makes sense to have those, things like this. But, you know, this label that's left over from the oscillator, where would I put that in this instrument? Because nothing that the user needs to interact with is the oscillator itself, it's just the things. So I could put it up here, but that wouldn't really make sense because we already know what it's doing. So I could just delete it. In fact, actually, I won't delete it because I want it to stay in my main window. So what I'm going to do is right click and go remove from presentation. Okay? And similarly, while I was developing this, I realized that there were things that I did want to control that I didn't have control of. So I added new features to control the envelope attack and decay. And similarly brought the resonance control in, which I'd forgotten about. So now I can control the envelope attack from my interface. Similarly, you know, I've got control of the delay level, but maybe I want control of the delay speed as well, or some other feature, you know, how it feeds back. Maybe I want the feedback rates. You know, really think about what your instrument and synthesizer needs and what is useful to control and what you want to be able to see. But make sure that everything is really clearly labeled, okay? It's not helpful to just have a random unlabeled slider there because you're not going to know what it does. Similarly, you know, I know that these are values in milliseconds, but I should probably label it as such. You know, here, filter resonance, I've said that it goes from 0 to 1, so I know what kind of value is going to be useful to go in there. So do think really carefully about, you know, what the user needs to know, okay? So when you sit down behind this instrument, imagine that you are someone else and, you know, put yourself in their position and think, okay, if I was using this synthesizer for the first time, what would I want to know? How would I want to control this? And what kind of things are going to be useful for me to know about? So, one final little section. There's a nice little thing just to kind of give a bit of polish to our interface and make it feel a bit like a software instrument. One thing I really like to do is, aside from color coding everything, is panels. Okay, panels are just really straightforward way of kind of letting us just section out bits of the interface. Okay, so for instance here I'm just going to set the gradient on this. Let's set it to something ridiculous just because. There we go. Ooh, isn't that garish? Okay, so now I'm going to right click, send to back, and now I can drag it in And voila. I have a little section. Okay, so I know that all of the stuff here in this box, all this yellowy orange section, relates to the automatic pitch control. Okay, now maybe I want another one, maybe a different color this time. Let's go, I'm just going to click random. Oh, green to orange. Again, center back. Now all of that is the master audio output section. And we've got three more sections here which I could sort of similarly panel off, so I could have the delay all in one bit and the filter and the envelope in another section. And that just really says straight away, okay, all of the things in this area are related. Okay, they all do a thing, and if you can identify that thing, or better yet, if you can put a big label on it and say what it does, that can be a really, really nice way of just focusing the user's attention. Please don't use color schemes as bad as this green to orange. I would generally avoid using the gradient and just go to color fill. There we go. That's a little better, isn't it? Okay. And then one final thing. So we've got our sections all marked off. Finally, a really good hint for showing the user, who you have to imagine is not yourself necessarily, just how to work this right from the off. I'm going to use this control and I'm going to write instructions. Okay, 1. Turn on. And you see that in the inspector, I've got bubble. Okay, and we can really clearly label sections. So I can say straight away, this is the first thing you want to do. You want to turn this on. 2. So I'm going to start the system secondly. That's the order of events that things need to run in. Maybe 3 would be control some of these parameters in the middle. Wiggle. That's the technical term for using a synthesizer. And finally, I'll just call this volume for now. There we go. Okay, now again, this is a little bit of a horrendous interface example, but you get the idea. Okay, now for a user, it's immediately obvious how to get this thing working. Okay, what they need to do to make some sound and control things. Okay, so really think carefully about how you want to present this instrument. Think about what's important, think about what is unnecessary, and ultimately think about, keeping the patch clear. Because if it's clear, it's easy to follow. It's easy for you and for someone using it. Okay, so please do take note of things like keeping your patch organized and keeping it well commented, because it helps you in the long run. Okay, so that's everything that you need to build a synthesizer now. We've gone right from kind of initially developing the oscillator right up to kind of figuring out and tweaking the user interface, okay, how someone's going to control that. Now there's one more step. You might have noticed that I've been doing some sort of fairly weird things with the automation and control throughout these videos, okay, so there's a lot of this stuff going on where things are generating and generative automatically. So I've got a couple more videos that I want to do after this, and we're going to focus on using an Arduino, which is a microprocessor board, and we're going to hook that up to kind of real-world sensors, things like, buttons and potentiometers, but also stranger things like light sensors. And we're going to have a little think about how we can use the kind of outside world to control our instrument, okay, beyond just some simple MIDI control, okay. So that's what we're going to look at next. We're going to take an instrument and we're going to figure out ways to control it using an Arduino microprocessor. So see you then, and enjoy.